Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. So excited to be joined across the way, back reunited with Mr. Jeff Abercrombie. Jeff, welcome back. It's been a while since we talked on air. Really excited to have you across the way tonight.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's that summertime, right? But I feel like you've had all the fun. It's been such a great row of guests. I know we still have a few more we're trying to squeeze in before the season really starts, but football is right upon us now. I mean, we have that college football season starting in a matter of weeks, and we have a whole landscape of players to get through to prep everybody for this college football season. So maybe just getting into it, first impressions, we're going to talk quarterbacks here. We just had a good class come in. What's your thoughts on the quarterback landscape in college football today?
Yeah, I mean, I've been digging through the film for the last 4 or 5 weeks or so as we've been having guests on talking about the NFL season and the rookies, and now we finally are going to turn the page. We might have another NFL show or two before the season kicks off to kind of one final look at the rookies before they start their regular season and overlook at the preseason. But we finally turned the page. We start turning the page to the upcoming college football season. We turn the page to the 2024 NFL draft. First episode tonight is talking about the quarterbacks. And I think this is going to be a really unique class because we got the high-end talent. We got a class that's going to rival the top when we had the year with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. And then we got some other wild cards that, Zach Wilson hasn't panned out in the NFL yet. Trey Lance hasn't panned out in the NFL, but they were a part of that really strong class. We might have another one or two guys emerge from this class to be in the mix to go in the top 10 or round one. And then I think there's a lot of really interesting guys that I kind of put on the day two range that we're going to kind of get into tonight also, that I really think if the season breaks right for these guys, could be other guys that elevate themselves into a position of potentially being looked at as franchise starting caliber quarterbacks at the next level and could maybe work their way into round one. I think it's a really strong group. It starts out really strong at the top, and I think there's a lot of interesting guys after the top two that could really make it a very deep and exciting class to watch. And we know these things change, right? This is why this is our first look. This is our summer scouting. It's a long way away from that 2024 season, right? In terms of the 2024 NFL draft. And we know just a couple years ago, right? We did a show like this, and the two names were Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell were supposed to be two locked in top 5 picks. We know how that turned out. We'll see about Spencer Rattler still in college. Sam Howell going to get a chance, but he fell all the way to, I think it was like the 4th round or the 3rd round. So things change a lot in the college football year from the summer until, the whole season and then the NFL draft process. But it's fun to kind of get my feet wet with all these quarterback prospects that I watch. We're going to go through them tonight. We're going to do it a little bit different than we've done these shows in the past. We're going to do it as more of my first rankings type in terms of that, going in the rankings. We're going to keep it real concise, like a minute and a half summary on these players and then keep it moving tonight because we're going to be talking about these guys a lot during the regular season and then obviously a lot in the pre-draft process, so it's going to be fun to kind of talk through these guys with you. I know you've had a chance to watch some of these guys and have some thoughts on some of these guys as well. So it's going to kind of be fun to get a chance to kind of talk through some of these guys with you and have a good time. For people watching on YouTube, we will be sharing the 2024 scouting notebook, which isn't even available yet for consumption in terms of the premium notebooks over at Saturday Sunday. Around Labor Day is usually when the new wave of notebooks drop. But what you're going to see tonight, if you're watching on YouTube, is my initial scouting reports on many of these quarterback prospects as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to see me kind of share the screen right now and get over to the Google Sheets document where all the scouting reports are written on.
Yeah, I mean, I think for this quarterback class, I've seen 4, 5, 6 different, early mock drafts, and we've got a couple of names that people are going to recognize at the top, but the 3rd or the 4th quarterback that they fit in that first round has been a different name for every single one of these mock drafts. And it's really about, there's players there with potential. There's players there who've had, maybe a little bit longer in college and have come in with the production. And I think it's going to get really interesting as we work our way down these rankings. So, I mean, I think it's no surprise. Let's start at the top. Number one ranked quarterback, Caleb Williams, junior at USC, 6'1", 215. Last year, he had 4,500 passing yards, 42 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and added another 10 touchdowns rushing with nearly 400 yards. Give me your first thoughts on Caleb Williams.
Yeah, so Caleb Williams, I think is going to be one of the most exciting quarterback prospects and talked about since Andrew Luck. I think he's going to rival Trevor Lawrence and maybe even be a prospect that we look at as even more talented than when Trevor Lawrence was coming out, because he really is the complete package. Yeah, his size and frame are just average, like you talked about, but he's got very good arm talent, the strength, the velocity to make every NFL pro. He shows good accuracy, ball placement. He can throw with touch. He's very good athleticism. He shows that in terms of his ability to move around the pocket, his rushing ability. He's got great poise under pressure. It's one of his elite traits, his elite playmaking ability to throw on the run, play off structure, throw from different arm angles and platforms. He's a great decision maker, pocket awareness, mental process. It's all there. He's a franchise quarterback, can play in any scheme. I think he's locked in to be a top 5 quarterback pick in the NFL draft with a super high ceiling to be an elite player.
Yeah, before Sean Payton was even a coach of the Broncos, and kind of last year when Caleb was taking the world by storm, he said the NFL is going to have a tanking problem this year. And you see it just with his innate ability to just know where pressure is coming from and evade it at all times. You'll see Mahomes comps all year with Caleb Williams. Just, I think the play style really kind of lends itself to that. I really have no concerns. I am about as excited for Caleb Williams as anybody else out there. And this is going to be one ride that's going to be extremely fun to watch. Let's keep it rolling. We'll go to the number 2 quarterback here. We're going to go to Drake Maye. He's a redshirt sophomore out of UNC. He's 6'4", 225, and rivaled production from Caleb Williams last year. 4,300 yards, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and more production on the ground, at least from yardage, 700 yards on the ground and 7 rushing touchdowns. Give me your thoughts on Drake Maye.
Yeah, so Drake Maye is another guy who's going to be considered a high-level caliber prospect. He's got the ideal prototypical size and frame. He's also got really good athleticism, mobility, rushing ability. He's got great arm talent. I would think his arm talent is even a little bit better than Caleb Williams in terms of his straight velocity and strength. He can make tight window throws. Very good accuracy and ball placement to all 3 levels of the field. He displays good to very good mental processing, touch, decision-making, and poise under pressure. I think he's another franchise caliber type quarterback. I think he's locked in the top 5. The only reason I'll say top 5 is because you have Marvin Harrison. I'm sure you'll have an elite defensive player or two be in the mix, and we don't know who's picking at the top of the draft, but he's going to go near the top of this draft for sure. The only difference between him and Caleb Williams is a little bit inconsistent footwork and mechanics at times, and you just don't see him make as many plays off structure, but besides that, high-level caliber prospect.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have similar notes here. I think one thing that I hear a lot about Drake Maye is his rushing upside is pretty high, and that's one of the things that I actually didn't see, at least translating onto an NFL field. I think it's not as much Kyler Murray. I think it's a little bit more Bryce Young, right? Be able to use his athleticism to extend plays, but not going to be a Justin Fields, even or Kyler Murray style producer on the ground at the NFL level. That's my point of view. I saw the same thing. I thought his mechanics, choppy, hoppy. He kind of plays the quarterback like he's a shortstop, right? Doesn't really have a set base ever, but he really does get those throws out there. And then I don't think it's really polarizing for those to be top 2 quarterbacks on most people's boards. Those are going to be consistently there at least. As long as they play well throughout the college season, you're going to see them at the top of mock drafts. You're going to see, them be the most hyped throughout this year. But I think it really gets interesting as we work our way down the ranks now. And this next player is one that I can't wait to hear what you have to say. And that's Quinn Ewers, your third-ranked quarterback. He's a redshirt sophomore for Texas, first year starting last year. He's 6'2", 205. He only played in 10 games last year. He did have an injury. He hit 2,200 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions through the air. Not as much notable rushing production. Give me your thoughts on Quinn Ewers now.
Yeah, the word you're going to hear with Quinn Ewers is toolsy and developmental upside to be a high caliber NFL prospect and a high caliber NFL quarterback, because he has everything you're looking for. He's got good size. I would say his frame is just about average, but I expect him to kind of grow into that a little bit more. He's got very good arm talent, similar to Drake Maye. It's right up there, velocity and strength. He can make tight window throws. You see the ball just snap out of his hand when he makes the throw. He can push it outside the numbers. He can push it vertically down the field. He can take some off and throw with good touch. He can throw from different arm angles and platforms as well. You talked about there's a little bit, obviously, more development and refinement needed. There's some inconsistent mechanics and footwork he's got to clean up. There's some inconsistent accuracy and ball placement. He's got to show his ability to go through progressions. Some of the mental processing has to speed up a little bit. He has to show he can throw on the run. But I think he's got all the tools to be a high caliber prospect that the NFL is going to look at as a late round 1, early round 2 currently at the moment.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, I did get a chance to look through a few players, and Quinn Ewers is one of those ones that I think he's a very polarizing player. He's probably the next name you're going to see along most people's boards, but in tools and potential, I mean, he's winning beauty pageants back in the pocket, right? But that accuracy and the ball placement is honestly a real problem in order for Texas to be a consistent offense. Like, he's missing some throws quite badly last year, and it's his first year starting. So, we oftentimes see progression and improvement. But if that's not there, it'll be really interesting to see his decision to go out into the NFL with Arch Manning behind him, or, does he stick around? What does the NFL think of him and when they give him the grades for pre-draft grades and his choice to go forward? So that's a more common
Jeff,
name.
let me just jump in one more time. Like, anyone who is watching on YouTube and sees the scouting reports, the amount in the developmental areas and concerns for Quinn Ewers is far superior than Caleb Williams and Drake Maye in terms of a complete prospect. Quinn Ewers right now it's all about tools and development. It's all about trait base. It's not consistent production. It's not consistent, mechanics or, accuracy. He's got a big arm. He's toolsy. He's got some athletic ability, even though I don't think that's going to be more of a using a rushing capacity. I could see people looking at Quinn Ewers in a similar light to maybe, when Zach Wilson started to really pick up a lot of momentum. Like, that's kind of where I feel Ewers is right now. It's all trait based. It's why my draft projection right now is round 1, round 2, because I'm not sure. It can go either way. And if Arch Manning steals the job, he won't even be in the draft, right? At some point, he'll be a transfer going to another program, and, he'll go the way of Spencer Rattler, right? Like, so this could really go in a variety of ways if he puts it together and shows more consistency. I think we're talking top 10. I think we're talking round 1. But if it goes the other way, I think you're talking staying in college, potentially transferring, not a guy who's going to force his way out as a guy who probably would not be in the round 1 mix if we see more of those inconsistencies. So he's one of those first guys in this class that I think is really polarizing, that the upside is high, and that's why I have him at 3rd, but he is far from a finished product right now.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think, it's definitely a tier break before we get to Ewers here. And I don't think people are talking about that potential track where he might lose the job. And, I think his play has to step up for him to keep it. But if he does, the weapons around him, the offense around him is going to be great as well. Let's walk into maybe a name that people are not quite as familiar with, Jordan Travis. He's a player I love. He's a senior from Florida State. He's 6'1", 202. Last year, he had 3,200 passing yards. He had 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and he has a rushing element to his game as well. 400 yards, 7 touchdowns rushing. Give us a little quick insight into Jordan Travis.
So Jordan Travis is a guy I'm really intrigued by. Average size and frame, good arm talent in terms of velocity and strength, average accuracy and ball placement, very good athleticism, rushing ability and mobility, with the ability to improvise, playoff structure, throw on the run consistently well. He can throw with good touch, shows poise in the pocket. Yeah, there's some things I could see him working on, inconsistent footworks and mechanics at times. When I watch him play right now, I think he's a day two type caliber prospect, but I see a lot of room for growth in terms of him. I think Florida State's going to be a much better team this year. So last year, I really liked Jaron Hall as a day three prospect. Obviously, I loved Bryce Young. I thought they were similar players at just at different levels of ability. I kind of think Jordan Travis is like smack dab in the middle of what I thought about Jaron Hall last year and Bryce Young, right? A guy who I thought was a round four guy, a guy who I thought was a top five pick. Jordan Travis is a really interesting player. I could see him moving up this board to be the number three quarterback in this class, or I could see him falling back a little bit to be more in that Jaron Hall day three mix.
And he has the environment around him to do it. And he has the flashes to do it. I think one of the most impressive things was, his ability to play well underneath, closer to line of scrimmage. And really just kind of, work the chains. His rushing ability is great as well. The consistency is something that we have to see, but you've seen big time throws from him as well. Let's move to the next guy, Riley Leonard. He's a junior. He's playing at Duke. He's 6'4", 211. Last year he had 3,000 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and I think a theme here, more production on the ground, 700 yards, 13 rushing touchdowns. This is the new prototype of what teams are looking for in NFL quarterbacks. What are some of his strengths that we can look forward to?
Yeah, so Riley Leonard is a guy who I don't think is getting a lot of publicity from like the general draft Twitter. If you look at the guys like Dane Brugler and the other, draft experts, he's being talked about. Really interesting prospect, great size, average frame, good athleticism, mobility, and rushing ability. But I do think like Drake Maye, some of that is a little manufactured. That like he's not going to be that 700-yard rusher at the next level. He's got average arm talent in terms of velocity and strength, but he can make most NFL throws that I think he needs to. Above average to good accuracy, very good ball placement. That's my favorite trait of him is ball placement and his ability to throw with touch as a vertical passer. So while he doesn't have an elite arm or even a great arm, he throws with great touch and he's got really good ball placement as a vertical thrower, good mental processor, good decision maker to work through progressions. Right now I have him as an early day two pick, high-end backup quarterback with the traits to develop into a starting quarterback. I think best in a spread offense that utilizes RPO concepts and pushes the ball vertically down the field.
I want to go through a couple more names here before maybe we just take a quick spot and assess where we are in our rankings and tiers. So I'm going to just jump straight into number 6 quarterback here, Joe Milton. He's a redshirt senior from Tennessee, 6'5", 236. He had 2 games started in 2022. He had 971 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, a little bit of rushing on the ground, 77 yards in those 2 games. We haven't seen much, but what have you seen?
So Joe Milton is a fascinating prospect. I mentioned before, toolsy, a lot of upside for a guy like Quinn Ewers. Joe Milton is right there. A lot of injuries in his past, very limited experience. He hasn't shown the ability to work through progressions, the mental processing, throwing with touch and anticipation, inconsistent mechanics and footwork. They're all there. Pre-snap, post-snap reads, all concerns. But what does he have? Great size and frame. Elite arm talent. Not great, not elite, best in the class in terms of velocity and strength to make every NFL throw outside the numbers, vertically down the field, tight windows. He's got good athleticism. In the limited time we've seen, he's got the mobility to throw on the run and make plays with his legs. He's got great play strength and toughness, tough to take down in the pocket, quick release to snap the ball out. I think there's some improvement there in terms of functional accuracy and ball placement. He's a developmental quarterback right now, but with those tools and in that offense, he's going to produce numbers. I think he's going to be really intriguing to the NFL evaluators next April.
All right, and I want to hit one more name here before we take a quick stop. JJ McCarthy, junior in Michigan, 6'3", 209. Last year, 2,700 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 300 yards on the ground with 5 touchdowns. Not gaudy numbers, but we know that Michigan program is was among the best last year. We expect it to be good again this year. Give us a profile on JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, so McCarthy's a guy who I think is going to continue to rise throughout the college football season. I think Michigan's a loaded team this year. When I watch JJ McCarthy play, good size, average frame, good athleticism, rushing ability, and mobility to throw on the run. We're talking about a former big time high school recruit. He keeps plays alive with his legs. He shows the ability to play off structure. He's got good arm talent to make the throws that he needs to make at the next level. I think his accuracy is probably just average right now, and also his decision making. So I'd like to see that improve a little bit. I do have some concerns about inconsistent ball placement, some concerns about poise under pressure. I'd like to see a little bit more anticipatory throws, pre-snap reads. I think that offense it doesn't ask him to do a lot because they're so much on the ground. But I think he's got a lot of traits that are intriguing. And if we see a little bit more put on his plate, I think that's really going to intrigue NFL teams. I have a day 2 grade on him right now, similar to some of the other players, backup quarterback with the upside and traits to become a starting quarterback, probably best in a spread or a West Coast offense that utilizes RPO concepts as well.
Yeah, McCarthy is one of those names that I'm seeing get that round 1 buzz. The early projections of this is a guy who's going to work his way into that this year. I did a lot of scouting for Blake Corum, and before we knew he wasn't going to the draft, and Donovan Edwards, and so I see a lot of JJ McCarthy, throwing passes off mark behind his, behind him in the flats and behind his receivers, and I think those accuracy and ball placement issues, are what's really keeping me from falling in love with him. Between McCarthy, Milton, Leonard, is there a tier break with them? I know they're all kind of, similar upside players. Are there other players that, is there a difference in between them and say Jordan Travis for you? Just give me a quick 2 seconds on where we are in our ranks right here.
Yeah, so I would say for me, Caleb Williams and Drake Maye are a tier. I do have a separation between them. I know some people out there, like Dane Brugler, has it as a 1A, 1B. I have it as a Caleb Williams clearly 1, Drake Maye clearly 2. I kind of have Quinn Ewers and Jordan Travis in a tier together. That's how much I like Jordan Travis, even though I think he profiles a little bit more as early day 2 than round 1, where Quinn Ewers, if he hits that potential, I think is a lock to go round 1. So then I kind of have Riley Leonard, Joe Milton, JJ McCarthy, and the next 2 guys we're going to get into momentarily, Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. They kind of make up the rest of the guys who I consider day 2 caliber prospects. But the fact that from in the summer, before the college football season, I have 9 guys on my radar that I think could be top 100 picks. That's pretty strong. I don't usually go into a college football season and have 9 guys that I potentially grade out as top 100 picks. So I think that for me is kind of how I have it tiered off of there. Williams and Maye in 1, Ewers and Travis in 1, and then a bigger tier from Riley Leonard, Joe Milton, McCarthy, and then down to Bo Nix and Michael Penix, kind of making up the guys right now who I look at as day 2 caliber players in terms of their traits and what I've seen and what I think they could become.
I love that you mentioned them, that they're sneaking into this tier because, as we get there, these are names that, I have a lot of interest in, following to see how they follow up last year's play and how they might take that into their draft capital this next year as potential round 1 players. And so I love to hear that they're going to be, in this tier for you. Let's get their profiles in here. Bo Nix, he's got a storied history. He's at Oregon now. He's a senior. He's 6'2", 225. Last year, he had a great season. He had almost 3,600 passing yards at a 72% completion percentage, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and then 500 yards on the ground and 14 touchdowns. What are you seeing out of Bo Nix, especially with his transition to Oregon?
Yeah, so like I said, this tier of guys is razor thin and could be re-ranked in any order. And I think there might even be some previous Oregon bias in my Bo Nix that I haven't been ready to fully buy in. But as I watched him more this summer, I think I'm starting to turn and be a believer more than a skeptic. So let me kind of take you through the process. So Bo Nix, good size and frame, good arm talent in terms of velocity and strength. He can make every NFL throw. He really has improved his accuracy and ball placement between the numbers. Still have some questions about outside the numbers. Good athleticism, rushing ability, and mobility to throw on the run and play off structure at times. I think his mechanics and his footwork are very clean, a drastic improvement from when he was at Auburn. I think he does an average to functional job in terms of handling pressure, going through progressions, the mental processing, the pocket presence, all have improved significantly. He's now able to show he can throw with some touch and anticipation. Is there still some inconsistency at times with his accuracy and ball placement outside the numbers? Yes, has to improve. There's still some inconsistency in terms of his decision making. He's still too aggressive, but he's reduced those bad plays. So I think I'm more ready to buy in. I put him in that group, backup quarterback with the upside and traits to become a starting quarterback, day 2 caliber prospect right now with room to improve.
Yeah, I mean, that's well summed up. I still think I have some bias from his Auburn days, but I think we have to recognize that's not a healthy ecosystem for developing players, especially at the quarterback position. Like there was a lot going on there. And I think this new scenery has really allowed him to take those steps as a player. And we don't know if he's capped out at where he was last year. He can take another step forward. Talking about another player who played really well last year, like you mentioned him, this is the last player in your tier, Michael Penix Jr., redshirt senior from Washington, 6'2", 221, 4,600 passing yards last year, 31 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. We finally saw a healthy, productive season, full season from Michael Penix Jr. So now that we got a chance to watch a full year of him, what are we seeing?
So Michael Penix Jr. last year, tremendous season. He's got good size and frame. I think the athleticism is probably just average. I think the arm talent is good. He can make any throw you need him to make. I think he's got above average accuracy and ball placement. He shows good mental processing with the ability to go for progressions quickly. He can throw from different arm angles with touch and anticipation. Like I said, I think the mobility and the athleticism are probably just average. I think the poise under pressure, I think we see him do it as a functional, same thing with his decision making. When I look at him and think about things where I'd like to see some improvement this year, we don't see much in terms of his rushing production. He's a little bit, obviously, an older prospect, right? The injuries and durability are a concern. We see some inconsistency in terms of his accuracy and ball placement outside the numbers or when he's throwing on the run, something we know you got to be able to handle at the NFL in this day and age. Some inconsistent mechanics and footworks at times. I put him in that day 2 group. I put him in that backup quarterback with the traits to develop into a starting quarterback similar to the other guys we've talked about tonight.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it earlier in his collegiate career that, we thought he had some of those tools in his tool bag from the athleticism. And maybe it's those injuries, but we didn't really see it last year. And you're right. I have him in my notes, very comfortable in the pocket, really good, at best in structure. And that's really where 90% of the NFL is played is as a pocket quarterback. But it's, what takes a prospect to the next step is how they can play in those 3 or 4 plays a game outside of structure where they might have to make something happen. I mean, you don't have to be able to elude the pocket to be able to do that, get out of the pocket, but you do have to be able to evade pressure within the pocket. And so I think that's where Penix is really going to, make or break his stock for me this year. So we hit a tier break. But I think we still have a few exciting prospects here to go. Jayden Daniels, senior out of LSU, 6'4", 185. He really turned it on towards the later half of last year. 2,900 passing yards, 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, but almost another 900 on the ground with another 11 touchdowns. We're talking about another dual threat here, Paul. What else does he have in his game?
So when I look at Jayden Daniels, this was a guy I was a fan of before he even transferred to LSU. And I think we're starting to see the passing aspect develop to the point that makes him an NFL caliber prospect. I classify him right now as a developmental quarterback with the upside due to his arm talent and athleticism to become a backup quarterback in a scheme that heavily utilizes RPO concepts. He's got good size. I think he's still got to add to that frame for the next level, but he's got good arm talent in terms of his velocity and strength. He can throw with touch, something that's impressive It's always been impressive, even since his early days, in college. He's got very good athleticism. He's got elusiveness, rushing ability, the mobility to throw on the run, playoff structure, very dangerous weapon in terms of the RPO game. He can make plays with his legs inside and outside the pocket. There's some concerns, right? Inconsistent ball placement, some play strength issues, some footwork at times is a little shaky. But I think he's a guy that in today's day and age in the NFL, there's a place for Jayden Daniels at the next level.
Yeah, I think a backup quarterback is somebody you expect to have potentially accuracy and placement ball issues. One thing that does show up is his experience. He steps up when pressure hits the pocket. That's something that you see younger quarterbacks within the college try to, flesh out the roll out the pocket, and he steps up and will still get out of the pocket and scramble and get tons of yards with his feet. But that's something that, I think we see with experience, and maybe talking about players who have gotten better with new environments like Bo Nix, and somebody who's shown some growth, as they've gotten the experience. Number 11 quarterback on our rankings here is Spencer Rattler. You alluded to him at the top of the show. He was once, locked in as the top prospect. He's now a redshirt junior at Arkansas. He played there last year, 6'1", 210, with 3,000 passing yards, 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. The year before at Oklahoma, 1,500 yards, 11 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. We saw a little bit more on the ground as well.
So Spencer Rattler, I think you said Arkansas, it's South Carolina, but Rattler is a really interesting guy because we talked about him before in terms of he was a guy that once upon a time was considered a guy who was locked in, top 5 pick at Oklahoma, and then things kind of fell off the rails. So he goes to South Carolina last year, and I think he's starting to work his way back into a draftable prospect. Not a guy who's going to fall deep in the draft. Maybe he's not back to where he was, but there are things to like about his game. So let me kind of take you through a little bit here. So Spencer Rattler, average size and frame, good arm talent in terms of velocity and strength. I think the accuracy and the ball placement are fairly good. He's got a really quick release. He's always had that. He throws with good touch. I think he's got average to above average athleticism and mobility. He's not going to make plays with his legs in terms of rushing, but I think he can move around and buy time in the pocket. And he shows the ability to play off structure, throw on the run outside of the pocket. There was a lot of years ago comparisons to a guy like Baker Mayfield, right? After Mayfield had his success at Oklahoma. And you see some of that success from Spencer Rattler that looks like Baker Mayfield when Mayfield was at Oklahoma as well. He's got to still continue to improve in terms of going for progressions, his decision-making, his mental process. He's got to speed it all up, pocket presence, handling pressure in the pocket. But to me, he's an early date for guy right now, backup quarterback, upside and natural traits, maybe to develop into a starting quarterback down the line in a particular scheme.
His upside was there, and we'll really have to see, if he's able to recapture some of the magic. I said Arkansas because I'm excited for one more name we have on our list that I hope we get to today. But before we get there, let's start with number 12, Shadeur Sanders. Transfer into Colorado. He's a junior, 6'2", 215. Last year at Jackson State, 3,700 passing yards, 40 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. There's a level of competition change there. But while he was playing, give us some of the strengths that we should look forward to, Colorado seeing.
Yeah, so Shadeur Sanders, really interesting prospect that, we're trying to, see how he translates up to the higher level of competition coming from Jackson State to Colorado. But when you watch him play in terms of the film that's available from Jackson State, he's got average size and frame. The arm talent, good in terms of velocity, strength, accuracy, and ball placement. He showed all of that at his time at Jackson State. Good athleticism, even though he doesn't have a lot of rushing production. I think the athleticism is there. He just didn't need to use it at Jackson State. He has an ability to be a weapon in the run game as well. He's got the mobility to move around inside and outside of the pocket. He showed some ability to throw on the run and play off structure when needed. Again, at Jackson State, not a lot of times it was needed. For him, it's the question marks, the level of competition. Freshman, sophomore season at Jackson State, how does he do in terms of the stepping up to the next level, clean up the mechanics and the footwork a little bit, show his ability to go through progressions and throw with more anticipation. He's a very interesting early day 3 prospect with room to potentially grow this upcoming season.
Yeah, and our next quarterback here, was also a transfer last year, but in 2021, Cameron Ward, quarterback 13 on our list here, junior in at Washington State University, 6'2", 225. He transferred from Incarnate, a D2 school in 2021, where he had 4,700 passing yards, 47 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, just gaudy numbers, right at the D2 level. He comes in and does nearly the same stuff, for Washington State, 4,700 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. What's the scouting profile for Cameron Ward?
So Cameron Ward was a guy I was really interested with last year, taking that big jump up. And I think he showed that he belongs, right? And I think that's the first thing you want to see when you're talking about a guy coming from Division II up to the, Division I into a major program like that. When I watch him play, good size and frame, good athleticism and mobility to throw on the run, playoff structure. He's got a really quick release. He shows the ability to throw from different platforms, different arm angles. I think the arm talent is good enough. The velocity and strength, accuracy and ball placement. He can throw with touch. He has the ability to improvise. For me, the concerning parts are still, I want to see more in terms of reading coverages, the mental processing, quickly going through progressions, inconsistent mechanics and footwork, especially, if he's dealing with pressure. So again, to me, the athleticism and the arm traits make him an intriguing developmental quarterback prospect with the upside to maybe develop into a backup quarterback. He's got that day 3 type grade, and we saw a lot of guys go on day 3 last year. Teams are looking for those cheaper quarterbacks.
Our next quarterback here is a player that we got a chance to talk a little bit last year. There were some flashes and some inconsistencies. Quarterback out of Miami, Tyler Van Dyke. He's a senior this year. He didn't come out last year. It's his third year, starting after a redshirt freshman year, 6'4", 225. He's had limited games. So his, in the last 2 years, 10 games in 2021, 9 games in 2022. So the numbers aren't going to look as inflated because of those games missed. But last year, 1,800 yards, 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. We talked a bit about him last year. We talked a bit about his inconsistencies. What is one thing you're excited for Tyler Van Dyke to bring to the table?
Yeah, so Van Dyke is a really interesting prospect because we're talking about a guy who last year was thought of as maybe a round 1 caliber prospect. We thought that's where it was going. And then he was benched at one time and he just wasn't the guy that lived up to those expectations. So I think when you look at a guy like Tyler Van Dyke right now, he's a developmental quarterback with upside traits. And I don't even want to classify him as a backup or a guy who could develop into a starter because I think there's so much still to unpack with Tyler Van Dyke. I don't even know if this will be his last year in college, but he's got great size and frame. That he has. He's got very good arm talent in terms of velocity and strength. He can make any NFL throw. He can push it outside the numbers. He can push it vertically down the field and in the tight windows. He's got good play strength, toughness, and physicality. He's tough to bring down in the pocket. He almost reminds you of like a Big Ben in terms of his body type and frame only. Average athleticism and pocket mobility, average to above average accuracy and ball placement to all 3 levels of the field. Things that, concern me a little bit. He doesn't do a lot with his legs. And we know that's in vogue right now. That he doesn't handle pressure very well. He's got to improve his ability to read coverages and his pre and post snap, understanding of defenses, show that he could, the mental processing aspect of it.
Let's keep it moving. Number 15, quarterback Jaxson Dart, Jr. out of University of Mississippi, 6'2", 220. Last year, he had nearly 3,000 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, again, some production on the ground, 600 yards and a touchdown. We've seen him for a couple years now. How has his game developed and what are we looking for this year?
So when I watch Jaxson Dart, he's a guy who's been he's been a Debbie Darling in the community for quite some time. That I think we're still waiting for that breakout year. But when I watch Jaxson Dart play, we're talking about a dual threat backup quarterback that would be best in a spread offense that utilizes RPO concepts. I think right now we're talking about a day 3 grade. We'll see how this year kind of plays itself out. He's got average size. He's got good frame. He's got good athleticism, rushing ability, and mobility to throw on the run and playoff structure. He can throw consistently well from different arm angles angles and platforms. He shows good touch. I think the accuracy and the ball placement are probably just average. I got question marks about his decision making. He's got to decrease the number of turnovers. He's got to show that he can handle pressure better. There's some inconsistent ball placement and accuracy at times. He's got to show that he can work through progressions a little bit quicker and deal with the pre and post snap reads. So there's a lot of development from the quarterbacking side. I didn't see as much growth under Lane Kiffin last year as I was hoping. We'll see if another year in the system, he becomes a little bit more comfortable running that offense.
And we have two more before we take like just another break to check in where we are on our rankings. So we'll go ahead and do these last two here. Sam Hartman, Notre Dame. He's a senior. He's 6'1", 210. Last year he played at Wake Forest. 3,700 passing yards, 38 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. I've got a friend who's a huge Notre Dame fan. I'm actually going to be getting the chance to see Hartman live, Notre Dame versus OSU later this year. So what am I looking forward to here?
I think you see Sam Hartman, very smart, instinctual player. Like, to me, if he had a trajectory of Case Keenum, I think that's very in the range of outcomes. Like, it's not likely because a late round pick doesn't have usually a career like Case Keenum. But I think we're looking at a guy who can start out as a third string or practice squad quarterback and develop into being a backup quarterback, especially in like a West Coast style passing offense. I think he's got average size and frame, average athleticism, average arm talent, but really good accuracy and ball placement, especially in the short to intermediate parts of the field. I think he's a really good mental processor, shows the ability to quickly go through progressions, really good understanding of pre and post snap recognition. He throws with good touch and anticipation. He's not going to give you much in terms of rushing ability and rushing production. There's some inconsistency, accuracy, and ball placement vertically down the field, because I don't think he has that top level arm talent you want. You don't see a lot of tight window throws, and there's some inconsistent upper body mechanics. You don't see a lot of playing off structure and throwing on the run.
And then, I jumped ahead of myself talking about Spencer Rattler, but, we also talked about Quinn Ewers at number 3 getting drafted high because of his tools. I'm excited to talk about Arkansas senior KJ Jefferson, 6'3", 252. He had almost 2,700 passing yards last year, 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, more production on the ground, 640, 9 touchdowns. I mean, we're talking toolsy here. This is a guy that, I'm curious. So what are we seeing now, and what does he have to do to really improve his draft stock?
Yeah, KJ Jefferson probably has the case that he can probably improve his draft stock of any quarterback I've talked about tonight. We're talking about a guy who's got like Cam Newton like measurements. So he's a dual threat. I have him classified as a backup quarterback right now, best in a spread passing offense that utilizes RPO concepts and takes vertical shots down the field. You talked about it. Good size, great frame, great athleticism, rushing ability, and mobility to throw on the run, playoff structure, good to very good arm talent to make NFL throws. He shows good touch and vertical passing ability. Average to above average accuracy and ball placement, things that I want to see this year that I think are going to make or break where his draft stock goes. Show the mental processing side more. The ability to quickly work through progressions, not take off so quickly when the first read is not there, which I think is the biggest issue right now. Some inconsistent mechanics, footwork, accuracy, and ball placement at times. Show the ability to improve upon his pre and post snap recognition, and his release is something I think to be cleaned up a little bit.
That gets us to, our, top 17 quarterbacks. We talked a little bit earlier, that's really where we see, a big chunk of our names. We have a few more ranked through here. You have 18 to 24 on your list. I don't think we're going to go through each one of them in depth. We will touch on them as they play this year, at least once, I'm sure of it. But I'm just going to go ahead and read through these last, 6, 7 names and give you a chance to go ahead and just highlight, an aspect on one or two of them that, you really want to put out there now so people are ready for the season. We'll start with quarterback 18. We know his name, DJ Uiagalelei, Oregon State now. Number 19, Devin Leary out of Kentucky. Number 20, Keaton Slovis. He's at BYU now. Quarterback 21 is Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina. Quarterback 22, Phil Yurkovich, who transferred out to Pittsburgh. quarterback 23, JT Daniels, who's now at Rice, and quarterback 24, Graham Mertz, who's now over in Florida. I'm going to give you the floor, Paul. Why don't you take it from here? 1 or 2 points, highlight some of the names that you really want to see.
Yeah, so I think this is basically the group of guys who have done a lot of moving around. Every single one of these guys, except Grayson McCall, has transferred and has moved around in college football. Some of these guys were highly regarded once upon a time, like DJ Uiagalelei. Caden Slovis was once upon a big-time prospect. Phil Jerkovich was once considered a top 50 prospect. JT Daniels was like a 5-star recruit that I think started out at USC, right? And then went to West Virginia. It was a Georgia stop in there. Some of these guys have been guys that I've had full detailed scouting reports for years now and just continue to update it, as they transfer to a new spot. So, these guys at the end there, especially Daniels and Mertz, they're probably not the 23rd or 24th best quarterback. There's some guys that we have like on a watch list that are probably more intriguing than those guys, but they're just guys that we've been following for so long. I've been watching them for years and years. So I felt the need to include them in my initial ranks of guys that I've watched, which these 24 guys are guys that I've watched in depth. So that's why they're kind of there at the bottom. But the guys that, for me, there's really, DJ Uiagalelei is the guy that really stands out on this, because it wasn't that long ago that we thought he was on the trajectory to be the next, top level Clemson quarterback prospect, after Trevor Lawrence. There was last year when I talked through him, there was a lot of similarities between Uiagalelei, college quarterback when he was at his best, and then Dak Prescott in college. And I thought he was going to take that next step to maybe become, a early day 3 or even a day 2 type prospect. And once upon a time, I even thought he was going to be a round 1 guy. So I'm interested to see if the change, in college, going to Oregon State, maybe the pressure of Clemson kind of resets himself. Can he get back to that? Because we're talking about a guy that's the prototype. We're talking about the guy with the size and frame, that teams are looking for, the athleticism, the play strength to stay alive in the pocket, to make throws on the move. Like for him, it was just about inconsistency. So moments where he looked like a round 1 guy, or moments where he looked like a UDFA prospect. Can he find some level of consistency, playing out there, on the West Coast now, at Oregon State? I think he's the guy that intrigues me the most. Devin Leary last year, a lot of people, last year when he was at NC State, thought he was on that round 3, round 4 border. It didn't materialize. Now he goes to Kentucky. He replaces Will Levis. We'll see, can he get back to that? I think those are probably the 2 that intrigue me the most. There's some people that still believe in Caden Slovis. I don't see it. I've never been as high on Slovis as the Devy community was. Grayson McCall last year, some people thought he was a round 3 guy. I didn't have him there before the season, so I think he's more of a late round stab type guy. And then Phil Jerkovich, I never just saw, when he was getting some buzz, I would watch Boston College and I didn't see what other people were seeing. I didn't see the arm talent that some saw. I thought he didn't play up to his size and frame. The athleticism I thought was a little bit, suspect. I know he got some yards, but I think it was more the scheme in the system than him. So there's a lot of guys with question marks here, but sometimes you get them in a new environment. You get them with a different coach. We see it at the NFL, right? I see it in my hometown here in New York, right? The difference between Daniel Jones and just what I think is capable of now, under Brian Dable compared to what he was, with Jason Garrett, night and day. So some of these guys, maybe they weren't in the right scheme. Maybe they weren't asked, to play up and maximize their strengths. And maybe in the new situation, maybe they can. So that's why I think we leave the light on for these guys. They're going to be guys that I think we're intrigued to check in on. Do any of these guys kind of refine what once upon a time had them as much more highly thought of prospects, right? JT Daniels was once thought to be a really high level prospect. Same thing with Jerkovich, same thing with Slovis, same thing with Uiagalelei. Devin Leary never had that Devy type buzz, but also was a guy that last year some thought he could be in the mix, where we saw guys go last year like Stetson Bennett and Jaron Hall and Aiden O'Connell. A lot of people thought that was Devin Leary last year also, and maybe just didn't finish materializing there in NC State. So, I think the interesting thing is when we started Saturday to Sunday, we kind of were under the impression 8 to 10 quarterbacks are going to get drafted most years. Now, I think last year we started to see a little bit of a shift that teams are going to take more stabs on day 3 guys than I think we've ever seen before to try to see if they can find a backup quarterback on the cheap because of how much now backup quarterbacks cost to get a good serviceable backup quarterback at the next level. So I think now it's not just about knowing 8 or 10 guys. I think now we're going to have to start going into the draft and having 15 to 20 names on our mind. Not saying 15 to 20 are going to go, but I think we might start seeing more like 12, 13, 14 quarterbacks going to draft and not like 9, 8, 9, 10. And I think that's what makes some of these names a little bit interesting here, because I think some of these guys who are in my 18 to 24, they can move their way up a little bit. And some of these guys aren't going to come out, right? They're not all seniors. So some of these guys we're talking about down here, they have a chance to be drafted. They have a chance to be round 4, round 5, where these teams are hoping these guys develop into backup quarterbacks down the line. So it's going to be fun to check in on these guys. Like I said, all of them are playing in new spots next year, except Grayson McCall, who did enter the transfer portal and then backed out. So literally every one of these guys on this list either transferred and in McCall's case entered the transfer portal and ended up coming back and staying at Coastal Carolina for another year.
Yeah, and honestly, you mentioned it. A lot of guys are going to go back to school, and there's going to be these guys looking for draft hopefuls. And you have a QB watch list on your notebook rankings. I don't think we need to do anything more besides take a name or two. But there's a couple down here, and the obvious one being Kyle McCord. Dylan Gabriel is a guy I've liked. Jayden Daniels is someone who I took note of last year as well. Is there any other name you want to highlight just for people to put a bug in their ear for when they see a game going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned the top 2 right there in terms of, Kyle McCord is a guy who could easily, there's just no film on him to watch anything to make an evaluation right now. So Kyle McCord is the one guy. If Carson Beck is the starter for Georgia, I think obviously Georgia, you gotta keep an eye on anybody who's playing for that program and what they could do. So I would say Carson Beck out of Georgia, Kyle McCord out of Ohio State. You mentioned Dylan Gabriel out of Oklahoma, and then up row Michael Pratt out of Tulane. I think those would be the 4 guys. Maybe Austin Reed out of Western Kentucky. Those would be the handful of guys from there. And we'll be interested to see if Spencer Sanders takes the job from Jaxson Dart. We talked about Jaxson Dart before, but I also have Spencer Sanders out of Ole Miss also on the QB watch list here. So it'll be interesting to see. My guess is in time, some of these guys will be guys that once there's some film on them, especially the Kyle McCords of the world and stuff, and Dylan Gabriel, some more film, those would be guys that maybe like I add to the scouting notebook, right? This is a first look. So right now when the new notebooks come out, you're going to have 24 detailed scouting profiles for the quarterback position. I've never started with that many from the summer. There's 24 in there already. My guess is between the season and then the pre-draft months, with the Senior Bowl and stuff like that, there'll eventually probably be close to 30 detailed, scouting reports on quarterbacks. In that, we'll see who comes out and who doesn't. But I think that just tells you how deep the quarterback is in terms of intriguing guys to at least evaluate from a college perspective in terms of trying to translate to the next level. So yes, I think the watch list had some interesting names, especially considering we have a couple from major programs like Ohio State and Georgia.
Paul, it's absolutely been a pleasure to get back on here. I know your guests have been stellar. I've been listening to each one of those episodes. I think if anybody's missed them, it's been a stellar cast of characters with, I know, a few more to come, some of our favorites to get in there if we can get them on the schedule. And I know we're going to be doing the other positions as well. I hope to be able to be here to walk through them with you as well. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, listen, I'm excited to be digging into this class now. I've finished the running backs and tight ends. They'll probably be the next 2 shows. The tight ends are all written up. The running backs, hopefully they'll all be finished written up by Monday. We'll probably look to aim to do a running back show next week, and then maybe the week after double dip and do a tight end and wide receiver show that week. 2 separate shows, but do a tight end and wide receiver show that week to kind of have those 4 in the books. Seeing if I can get a guest on the kind of preview to college football season. And then, as you mentioned, maybe we'll circle back to the NFL rookies, maybe with 1 or 2 guests before the summer as well, just to kind of check in on those guys before they start their journey as NFL rookies. But this quarterback class has me excited, right? We kind of broke down, the tiers before in terms of, the top 100 in terms of the round 1 guys, the borderline round 1, round 2, the rest of the day 2 guys. But there's a lot of interesting names. And I think what you're going to see is a lot of movement, right? The last guy we really talked about was KJ Jefferson, who was down 17, but he can be a guy that catapults himself all the way into the late day 2 mix, I think. So he's at 17 now, but he could push his way, into that 8, 9, 10 range. And there's other guys on day 2. Does Jayden Daniels take another step in his throwing and that side of his game to add to the athleticism? So there's a lot of guys. And then we said, that late spot with all those transfers. Does somebody just find a different gear and find their way back to, what people once upon a time thought about those guys? I think is a really fun storyline. I think it's a really interesting quarterback landscape right now. Can Caleb Williams and Drake Maye? I don't see anybody thinking that there's any way they can go the way of Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell from a couple years ago. I think those guys are locked in, minus like a devastating injury of being two guys that we're talking about right near the top of the 2024 NFL draft. But things change, right? Like, we were right on Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, right? They held serve, but no one was really talking about Zach Wilson that year, right? And we were talking about Trey Lance. We didn't know how high he can go, but he was an intriguing guy. I think that's how I feel. I like Trey Lance more than a guy like Quinn Ewers, but who can be Zach Wilson, right? That's the wild card that we're not talking about top 5, top 10. Is there somebody from this class? And I think there's so many interesting names on day 2, that right now would be maybe classified as day 2 type guys, from Jordan Travis to Joe Milton to Michael Penix and the rest of those guys we talked about. Can somebody else materialize? Or maybe there's not even a guy we mentioned tonight, right? That's always the fun part. Can there be a guy that, like, no one had Joe Burrow even on their radar when he entered his final season in college, and then look what happened there, right? So it's a fun thing. It'll be interesting to see if anybody emerges and adds themselves to the mix. It'll be interesting to see if the top guys hold firm, and then how the rest of it kind of shakes itself out, and that'll be fun to kind of throughout the season. I don't think, we could talk about Drake Maye and Caleb Williams every week on the show, but I think we're going to have a lot of interesting quarterback discussion, because I think it's a really unique class with, all different styles of play and guys who have a lot of experience, guys who have limited experience. We're going to go on a little bit of a roller coaster, similar to the Anthony Richardson roller coaster last year. I think we might have some guys that might take us on a little bit of that roller coaster this year as well, and we'll see if they can turn it into the draft success that obviously put Anthony Richardson, right there at the top of last year's draft. So really excited. Running backs next week. Then we'll turn to the pass catchers. Hope you like this new format where we did it in ranking style, really quick hitters, really easy to digest. If you're watching on YouTube, hopefully you enjoyed, taking a glance at the scouting reports as well there, as Jeff and I were talking through it. So on behalf of Jeff, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.